Hey guys, welcome back to How to Build a Layout right here exclusively on TrainWorldTV. Now in a previous video we talked about creating the landforms for our river area and we shaved off a lot of foam. Now we're going to continue on with finishing off those landforms and applying a backdrop. So with that said, let's get started. Okay, so let's go over materials for finishing up your landforms. I have picked a mixture of finely detailed trees from JTT products and a little more of a budget-minded tree to mix in so you're not spending a small fortune on trees. We have blended turf. This is going to be applied directly to paint. You go to your paint store, ask for basically an earth tone paint, and they'll mix you something up. There's nothing on the shelf. We have some Woodland Scenics coarse turf and some Woodland Scenics blended turf. And Woodland Scenics also offers some trees as well. I just have a little bit of a preference towards JTT for the trees. Woodland Scenics also offers coarse talus or a little finer talus. And that's going to be used because in the backdrop there are rocks along the river, so we're going to try to blend that in the best we can. Obviously put this down on some project paper or something. This came with the backdrop, so it's easy to use without any additional cost. Now as you can see, there's some separations here. I'm actually going to leave those. They're kind of like layers of the earth, and they're mostly going to be covered up by the bridge anyway back in the rear of this area. Again, we have this removed from the little subset, so that's easier to work with, but if you must, you can work on the layout. But foam is so easy because we can just plug those trees directly into the foam by pushing them down in, maybe a little glue to hold the base steady, but let's not get too ahead of ourselves. Let us start with the brown paint. And the only thing you're going to want to be careful of, maybe even consider covering up, is the riverbed. But we're applying the brown paint on this foam all over. Now as you can see, I have applied some thick areas of paint here, and now I'm feathering it in all the little areas of the foam. And you may want to just use Woodland Scenic Smooth It or something to create a smoother surface over some of these terrain areas. But you can do it this way if you want, less steps. But, it is hard. The foam tries to peek through anywhere it can, and you have to use this technique of just bristle edges to get it. Now, this area here I don't really care much about. That's where the bridge, the two bridges will go. I'm actually leaving a little area undone to remind myself, hey, don't put turf here. So we've done this one side. I'm going to go ahead and move on while the paint is wet, because you need the paint to be wet. But what you're going to do is take some of your blended turf, and I have a shaker, so I'm using the shaking side, not the spoon side, and I'm just going and applying this to the paint surface here. And now that the river is dry, you don't have to worry about getting stuff on the river, because it'll come right off. It'll blow off. The river's got a nice firm surface. So as you can see, this turf is helping to stick to this paint. The paint being one color and the turf being slightly a different color. It's going to help achieve a little bit of a level of realism. I think I might have went a slightly darker brown if I would have known, but it helps. We also have this coarse turf here, which is a slightly different color, and that's going to add a whole nother level to your terrain. I don't know how well you can see that. Now this coarse turf packs a little more. Now as you can see, that is not going to adhere to the paint like the fine turf does, but we've got a step for that that'll help out As you can see, we're smoothing out some of these edges here. We're adding another color that's a little more lively, that looks a little more like the summer colors that are in our backdrop. And again, don't worry about the river right now. When we cement this down, you're going to want to worry about the river. So I kind of alluded to what the next step is, and that is to scenic cement everything down to make sure it doesn't move. Alright, we have the other side here. Going to start with our fine blended turf. Now some people may say, well, why didn't you do this before the river? There's a risk with that. That's the fine materials may fall in. I'm actually considering a couple more levels of depth on this. And I guess we could see, but I think what's going to happen is some of this fine stuff is going to fall into the river and really mess up your river, because now you have suspended particles, you know, in that wet river mix, and that's never a good thing. It may be able to be masked, but it's highly unlikely it's going to be masked. Let's just take that lid off there and let her rip with some coarse turf. Don't want it in between the bridge area. That's going to mess up the ability to, well, that's just falling right down there, but you don't want to mess up your ability to have even level on your bridge. I'm going to gently brush this excess out of the river area. And if you want to, because this stuff can really get a cost up, this is just a dry paintbrush, you can salvage it. So I'm just going to slide this forward, make sure my center of gravity doesn't make it go off the edge, but we're going to just get all this off the riverbed here. Now, I don't mean to sound crude, but this is the most basic of scenery skills. You know, you apply paint, you put some turf on, and then you put some coarser turf on, and then you scenic glue the whole thing down. What I'm relying on is the realism of the backdrop to do 90% of the modeling for me in this case. You can obviously dive really deep into modeling and make some amazing scenes on their own, but I'm relying on my lack of artistic skill to be made up by the backdrop, and I'll show you how it really can do the job once this whole scene is in place. Alright, our next step is to seal down this scenery. Now you can mix your own scenery glue, or you can buy Woodland Scenic cement. I mixed my own just to show you guys. It's a mixture of 3 parts glue, 1 part water, and 2 drops of dish detergent. There'll be a slightly different mix that we use for the ballast, but I think if your budget affords, I would just get Woodland Scenic cement, because this was a little bit of a pain. This is a mist bottle. I had to play with the dilution of the glue and water mix to get it down to where it doesn't streak, because it'll just run a stream. And as you can see, even with this mist setting, we're displacing some scenery here. So the goal is to spray. You want a mist bottle if you're gonna go about it on your own. The Scenic cement comes with a bottle that has a pretty decent setting on it. You're still going to displace some of your scenery, so I am using this block here to prevent this from hitting the water, because you can spot the water, cause the water to have a funny appearance. So we don't want that. So once I've soaked down the whole area, we will let this dry. I will repeat on the other side, of course, as well. Once the area is dry or close to dry, it's time to apply some trees. Now, I mentioned earlier we have a variety of trees. We have some high-end trees from JTT Scenery. We have some kind of middle-of-the-road trees. Then we have a whole bag of budget trees. So just mix these in and make it look nice, and you're going to want to blend with your backdrop, and we'll get to that even more when the backdrop's up. The great thing about foam, it does have its downsides, but it has its upsides too, is for trees, you just simply plant the tree in the foam and you're ready to go. So I'm going to go around doing this in different areas of this portion of the train table or layout. I'm just going to position some of these trees. You know, usually you don't see them growing off the side of cliffs as straight as these are. So I'll be keeping most of these up towards the top. We're just going to plant them in this foam here. Now, some of the lower price trees you may find just appear a bit too unrealistic and shiny. You can spray dull coat, you can Google search that, and spray that to taper this down. I've used that on the bridges to take away the plastic appearance, and you can use that on tree stumps and branches as well. Another product I like is a Super Turf. It's texture foliage. If you use this, my suggestion is to glue it down, but just placing this around adds another dimension. You can make it a clump of bushes, add more depth and color to it by placing it around the layout on your foliage mix. For the trees further off, you want to do your best to kind of blend those into the backdrop and make them look as natural as possible so that that backdrop will blend right in, and we'll get to that in the backdrop segment of things. But this wraps up taking care of your landforms and building up your landforms, from laying the foam, shaping the foam, painting, putting on the ground foam and ground effects, ground cover, and adding the trees. Now we're ready for backdrop application. As I mentioned earlier in this series, the backdrop is cut out a certain depth here so that diorama will fit in and the backdrop will match it up. I've also painted the very back of the two areas of the module where the backdrop will be. You can see that right about there, so that we don't have any chance of painting the backdrop. And then I pre-positioned little white double-side stickers, probably a little hard to see. Those are located right here. Alright, the backdrop is on. We've blended into the sides with some Super Turf. Now we're going to slide the diorama in where we worked on this river. Alright, the diorama is slid in, and one kind of setback from having such a deep ravine is you don't get to see the river in the back as much. But if we lift up and have a different camera angle, you can indeed see that the river continues on in the back. So I will show you kind of a completed scene of a more shallow river as well, where you can clearly see the river continuing on. Well, I hope that wasn't too difficult for anybody out there, but if there are any concerns, be sure to leave a comment and I'll try to reply to them as I can, and we'll be able to help each other out as a modeling community. But overall, the landform is pretty easy, and if you're playing off of a realistic backdrop like we showed here from tracksideScenery.com, you'll be able to really enjoy and tie in your layout backdrop with your layout creativity and artwork with those landforms and those rivers. Now with that said, all the products you saw with the exception of the backdrop you can get on TrainWorld's website at TrainWorld.com, so be sure to check them out. With that said, thanks for watching right here on TrainWorld TV. Take care and we'll see you next time.